I have to hold this like I'm on a singing show, so that's what I'm going to do. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the very first CED lecture of the 2024-2025 academic year. It is wonderful to see such a crowd, so hopefully this sets the tone for the rest of the semester. I am Dr. Katie Morages. I'm an assistant professor in the CED and also the director of the Circle Gallery. Currently in the gallery, we are hosting the exhibit Mise-En-Scène, The Lives and Afterlives of Urban Landscapes. This exhibit is a collaboration between Chris Reed and Mike Belleme, who are joining us here this afternoon as our visiting lecturers. Chris Reed is the founder and design director of Stoss Landscape Urbanism, a design and strategic planning practice in Boston and Los Angeles, and professor in practice of landscape architecture at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. He's a leading voice on issues related to climate adaptation, racial and social equity, urban landscape, and the sociability of cities. He's been generous enough to travel from Boston, where I'm sure fall is on the horizon, to the horrible heat that refuses to let go here in Athens. Mike Belleme is a self-taught freelance photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. His work ranges from long-form documentary projects to assignment-based editorial work, photojournalism, and portraiture. In his work, he examines connection and community and what cultivates or inhibits that from happening. His assignment work, primarily focused in the rural southeastern US, can be seen in publications ranging from the New York Times to Rolling Stone and the Atlantic to Esquire, and many, many more. Now, many of you may not know that today is actually an important date in American history. One that I believe has a connection to the current exhibit and to tonight's lecture. On August 28th, 1955, an African-American teenager from Chicago named Emmett Till was abducted and lynched in Mississippi after being accused of acting inappropriately towards a white woman in a grocery store earlier that day. Now, in the Jim Crow South of the 1950s, it is unfortunately not remarkable that this act of violence happened towards Till. What was remarkable about Till's death was that his mother, Mamie's decision to hold a public funeral service with an open casket and to allow photographers to take photos of her son's brutalized body. These images, published in magazines and newspapers, brought attention to the brutality and inhumanity of Jim Crow and racism. And they've been credited with serving as a spark that ignited the civil rights movement. The story of Till is an illustration of the power of images. Images give us insight into the world around us. They help us understand places both familiar and unfamiliar. They reveal problems and successes in our society. They capture the everyday and the remarkable events in life. They can be a call to action. Tonight's lecture and the exhibit by the same title, Mise-En-Scène, The Lives and Afterlives of Urban Landscapes, demonstrate all of these things to us about images. Through the collaborative work of Reed and Belleme, Mise-En-Scène offers an immersive exploration of the social lives of urban landscapes, the actors and actions that compose the daily theater of urban life. Through photographs, maps, interviews with residents, and more, the project examines 7 American cities: Los Angeles, Galveston, St. Louis, Green Bay, Ann Arbor, Detroit, and Boston, and the social, cultural, environmental, and economic challenges of life in these and other American cities today. Finally, I will not forget, I want to let everyone know that this afternoon's lecture is being sponsored in part by the Wilson Center's Distinguished Artist and Lecturer Grant, and also in part by the CED's Vincent Ferguson Endowment. And for both of those, we are very grateful, as well as for our 2 speakers tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Katie. I'm Chris. That's Mike. I'm going to talk, then he's going to talk, then we'll talk together, then you can talk, and we'll have a good time. I really appreciate you all showing up. I love the beginning of the semester. Everybody's sort of bright-eyed, smiling, half smiling, still well-rested. So it's great to kind of come in and be the first here. On behalf of me and Mike, I want to say thank you to Katie. Katie's been absolutely amazing the last few months in first helping to organize this, putting together the applications for the grants that were necessary to mount the exhibit and to bring us here, putting together the lecture, hanging the show herself. I mean, it's really extraordinary. So Katie, thank you. To everybody at the school, the dean who came by to say hi. It's great to have everybody. I'm a little terrified tonight because Mike's parents are also joining us, which means I have to watch my language, and I feel like I'm going to screw up, so I hope I don't. Okay, we'll dig right in. To begin, the tensions between societal, racial, and environmental advancement and retreat, the battle for the hearts and minds of people, the battle for the planet, continue to play out in so many of today's public discussions around urbanization, new development, open space, the impacts of climate change, and planning and design strategies in cities. Mise-En-Scène is a project about the diverse and complex issues that shape and impact contemporary urban landscapes and cities, and by extension, urban and landscape practices like my own. This is a project about the lives and afterlives of cities and landscapes and the people who inhabit them, both the actors on stage and the urban, social, political, cultural, and environmental contexts in which they exist. It's a conversation about what we as designers encounter in our everyday work lives, and in many ways, how we channel the diverse voices, lenses, perspectives, and currents to inform our work and to form the bigger project of city making. In many ways, it's a project of reflection and curation. Reflection in that it takes stock of the moment, just pre-pandemic for the photographs, and a bit during for some of the essays. What are the issues that are in play in contemporary cities? What's the state of urban and public affairs, environmentally, socially, culturally, urbanistically? What is common and what is unique to each of these places? As a public realm practice, what are and have been the starting points for our own work? What are the currents we draw on, the acts and actors in progress? In this way, the lives and situations depicted in the photographs that you'll see tonight, that you see in the exhibit, set the stage for the work we do in cities, just as our designs and projects set up new or altered conditions that themselves prompt new responses, new actions, new dynamics, new scenes that continue to play out after we leave. It's also a project of curation. In the same way that we're not single actors in the places that we work, the book is an assemblage of lenses, voices, perspectives that are intended to paint a multivariate picture, to offer competing, complex, and contradictory standpoints, to stand along one another as an assemblage of things, and hopefully to reverberate creatively off one another. The book itself, which you'll also see in the gallery, is modeled a bit more on an art book, as a collection or scrapbook of pieces that allow for multiple entry points and multiple readings, depending where and when you start. It's one that asks questions and sets up prompts without attempting to tie a neat bow on the messiness and richness that is contemporary life. It's also not a monograph, and it's not aimed at an inside designer audience. It's intended to speak to a broader set of publics, especially those interested in photography and cities and design most broadly. And it's important to communicate with words and images that resonate with, or at least intrigue, a non-academic audience, one that extends far beyond the designers we usually talk to. The work extends from various lineages of photography. In landscape photography, of course, many of you are familiar with Ansel Adams, with Ed Bertinsky's more recent work on the right, even Alex McLean. But it's really rooted, Mike's work in particular, in documentary photography, photojournalism, and photography of the common American landscape. You're looking at two images. The one on the right by Frank Golke was from an exhibit in 1975 called New Topographics, Photographs of a Man-Altered Landscape. It was one of the first gallery showings of photographs of the common American landscape, not the exquisite, polished kind of landscapes that Adams was talking about. And this is a piece that that has informed Mike's work quite deeply, and he introduced to me during this collaboration. It's also the same era that folks like Jules Allen and Roy de Cariva were working. Allen's portrait on the left. Folks like them, black photographers, were not getting the same exposure even than some of their white colleagues, but their work is equally important. The project also comes from a lineage of designers collaborating directly with photographers, where the relationships between design, specifically landscape architecture, social reform, activism, and photography is not really new. Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect, was working knew of the work of Jacob Riis and Louis Hine, who were documenting conditions, particularly detrimental conditions, in the heart of the city. It's also part of the lineage that began most recently with James Corner and Alex McLean, taking measures across the American landscape, and extended to folks like Anu Mater, Alan Berger, Kate Orff, and the photographer Robert Misrak, as well as Michael Maltzan and Yvonne Bahn. Our project is one where the photographer's eye is most evidently present. My own voice and work are layered in a little more quietly as both a framer and as one voice contributing to the general milieu. As Katie said, the book and the exhibit are organized by 7 chapters, 7 American cities, taken west to east, interspersed by occasional maps that speak to the scale and combination of landscape, infrastructural, and urban systems that are present in each of these places, as well as artifacts from the world of practice. The work is enriched and informed by 5 collaborating writers, a curator, an ecologist, an artist, an activist, a designer, and critic, writers that take on issues of the day: politics, climate, social activism, cities, racism, COVID, as well as excerpts from both literary and multidisciplinary writers, as well as members of the general public. My role here was more curator, recipe maker, trying to bring forward certain flavors, certain elements, hoping that these things in combination would start to resonate. And we had some great sessions, workshops together with a photographic editor as well, with Petra from my office, who kind of banged her fist a while to kind of get us moving on things. But it really was an incredibly collaborative effort. But it starts with Mike and his camera. Initially, I'd say unfamiliar with the world of design, or at least my world, yeah. And yet laser focused on the people and places that constitute contemporary America. I came across Mike's work one Sunday morning, reading the New York Times on a piece that featured his work and a collaborator's work in Walmart parking lots in the South, which I didn't know you apparently can set up shop and camp out in these parking lots. The images to me were compelling, right? Really got at the nature of people, offered a sense of humor and a perspective. And so I dove in a little bit more, discovered some other projects that he had in the offing. One on the right was called Wild Roots, in a beautiful but challenging landscape, a project with nuance that captures the joys, the grittiness, the textures, and the intimacies of living with others off-grid. The image on the right is from a different piece called Stars and Bars, unapologetic, non-politicized look at Confederate life in the Deep South for a Middle Eastern news outlet. From there, a series of conversations ensued, conversations that we've really been having in multiple forms for the last 6-7 years at this point, I think. It's really a collaboration of learning how to see, how to perceive. For me, one that really allowed me to both inform the work and reflect on the work, and it's been a pure joy. I'm gonna turn the mic over to Mike, and he's gonna tell you more.
Thank you all for being here. I want to echo the thanks that Chris gave, in particular to Katie. She's just been incredible and instrumental in putting this all together, and we're just so grateful for the opportunity. So what I want to do, are we already? Yeah. Is really briefly give like a crash course speed round overview of a few bodies of work that I made leading up to this collaboration with Chris, just as a way of giving a little bit of extra context. These are bodies of work that are unrelated, but kind of in some ways informed how I approached this collaboration. So this first one is Wild Roots, which Chris already mentioned, and that was a body of work made in a primitivist intentional community in Western North Carolina. And this body of work is really very much about how people are interacting with the space around them. And making that work was hugely instrumental in my own life from that point moving forward. From the time that I started going to Wild Roots to now, my life has been hugely shaped by the time I spent in that place. Then this one, how Wild Roots was kind of instrumental in my life moving forward. This body of work called Kids of Hate and Love is about the subculture of street skateboarders, which is kind of me looking at my life before I got into photography. I was very intensely into skateboarding for about 12 years of my life, and I used documentary photography as a way to kind of explore that subculture and look at how it had shaped my life in ways that I liked and didn't like. And again, it's very much about how people are interacting with the environment around them. In this case, it's the urban landscape rather than the natural environment with Wild Roots. And then this body of work is called Sky People, and it's taking a look at the socioeconomic dynamics of the Caribbean cruise industry. But on a deeper level, it's really looking at the history of those islands and colonialism and capitalism, and at its core, the project really is about disconnection. So in that way, it's kind of the flip side of the coin from Wild Roots. Wild Roots is about being connected to the environment around you, and Sky People is kind of about what it looks like when everything in a space or a context is inhibiting any kind of real connection or rootedness. This body of work was different from the other two in that I wasn't making straightforward documentary images in the sense of this is an objective image of a particular thing happening. It's more metaphorical images that are taken contemporarily, but to engage with a history or past of that place. And that brings us to this collaboration with Chris. I learned so much from this collaboration, and it's really changed how I approach photography as a whole, I would say, moving forward, and especially how I choose to present work. And the main thing that I took away from it is the importance of a cross-disciplinary conversation and collaboration. Chris must have already understood this, which is why he had the idea to bring these voices together in the first place. But to me, this was somewhat of a new idea, but I was at that time already feeling a lot of frustration with this sense of kind of almost isolation of being in these thought bubbles, always being around people that had the same ideas as me, similar ways of viewing the work that we did. We're all kind of indoctrinated with the same stuff. So I found it really, really refreshing to be having some conversations about the things that I was interested in, but with people that were coming at it from a totally different angle. So when Chris brought me on for this project, it was a true collaboration in the sense that he was not hiring me to illustrate his ideas. He was hiring me, like he said, as an outsider from the perspective that he knew very well. And I was brought in to have my own ideas and have my own autonomy and creative control, which I, as an artist, all you ever really want is that sense of kind of creative control and sense that you can just be valued for seeing what you want to see. And then if you add money to the equation, it's just perfect. It's a rarity, but it occasionally happens. And then it's not just Chris and I's voices in this essay. He's also bringing together the voices of the writers that he mentioned, which really create a conversation across a bunch of different ways of thinking and disciplines. So that has just been a really cool opportunity to meld minds and share ideas. So as we got started on the project, the first step was just basically a whole lot of conversations between Chris and I. Sometimes we'd meet up in person and walk through a city together, like Boston, and he'd kind of help me start to understand his lens of how he sees the city, and a little bit about the design philosophy that informs the work that they do at Stoss. And the main thing I learned was that basically everything is relevant. Anything that affects the way people live in cities is factored in the way that they make their work. So it kind of meant everything was on the table, so I could just kind of explore freely and just follow my curiosity towards anything that I found interesting. But there were some certain themes that came up that I thought were particularly interesting and really kind of caught my imagination. One in particular that came up really early was this idea of reappropriation, which is kind of this idea of like utilizing a space in a way that it wasn't intended to be used. So this image we're seeing here, the one on the left is kind of a reappropriated space where someone kind of created a certain way of seating that they wanted in an environment. And the image on the right is a bench that was designed by Stoss at Harvard University. And it's kind of anticipating that type of multiple uses. And each bench is different, and each one can be utilized in like a broad number of ways. So I thought that was really interesting. And it, of course, struck a chord with me as a skateboarder, because skateboarding is nothing if not reappropriation of urban spaces. Oh, sorry, went too fast. Did I skip one? What's up? Okay, we're missing an image here for some reason. But anyway, also I was able to incorporate the Sky People kind of philosophy that where I was engaging with time. The interesting thing with the work that Stoss does is that, you know, photography is limited to 2 dimensions, but the work that they do is very much a 4-dimensional practice. So they're working with the 3 dimensions of space, but also engaging with time in a really specific way. And so some of the work they're doing with climate resiliency, for example, in places like Boston and Galveston, they're really considering 100 years into the future. And projects like the Brickline Greenway in St. Louis is very much engaged with hundreds of years of history and telling the story of this place and the people that lived there before. So the question is how to kind of tell the story of how people and ecologies adapt. Climate change is kind of the main way that we were looking at that, and how to make images that are taken now but allude to an unknown future. So I wanted to speak briefly about how I approached making this body of work. The most important thing for me to consider in making this work is that I am an outsider in every possible way. Even just being in cities is slightly uncomfortable to me. I'm more of a small town, rural person. So I felt very much like an outsider in every one of these places that I went. And that's important to consider as a photographer, because being an outsider and making work as an outsider has been done wrong in so many ways. And so we've seen a lot of examples of how not to do it. And it was up to me to figure out how I wanted to approach it and do better. The first thing for me is just immersion. Put myself in a space and truly be present and use all my senses to just feel and experience the place and be as vulnerable and open as I can possibly be in my interactions. I find that people tend to emotionally mirror whatever energy you kind of put out, people kind of give you back. So if I approach people with vulnerability and openness and just an open heart, I find that most people receive me with that and give me that in return. And in that way, I'm able to sort of be a conduit for energy to pass through from that person to you, the viewer. So the closer I can get to them and the more vulnerable and real I can be with them, the more they're going to be that with me, and the more that can pass through me to you. But I think the most important aspect of photographing as an outsider is humility. And I think this is actually equally true for what I do and what Chris does. Whether you're a photographer or designer, anytime you're coming into a space that you're not familiar with, there's no amount of data or research that you can do that is a substitute for true lived experience and perceived realities on the ground. So the most important thing that you can do is just to simply listen. For me, the most exciting part about working as an outsider is that I'm just genuinely curious, and I can approach the work and my process just being guided by that curiosity and wonder. But it's also important, I think, to not always satisfy the viewer's curiosity. So this image, for example, there's a tension to this image that exists because there's a central question in the image. The fisherman just caught the fish. He's either going to throw it back into the ocean, or he's going to give it to the eagerly awaiting bird, or he's going to put it in his cooler and take it home. And we don't know the answer to that question, or at least you don't. And so that's what makes it interesting. Believe it or not, the work of making the images for this project, it was, I don't know how many days of shooting, tens of thousands of images. That was kind of the easy part. That's a process that it's a thing that I'm good at. I know how to approach making images. The much more difficult process is actually to gather all of those tens of thousands of images and then try to decide on a selection of images and a sequence of images that actually starts to be cohesive and tell a story and have a point to it. It's like, why are we looking at this? And so I wanted to go through a sequence as it exists in the book. This is the Los Angeles chapter. And kind of walk through my personal interpretation of this particular sequence. So starting with this image of the tree in the front yard. It's not accompanied by any text. It's just blank. And then as we go to the next spread, we see two more images and some text. So immediately, you'll kind of recognize there's a technique that photographers sometimes call visual rhyming. And that's basically when you use images that have some kind of compositional or visual element that ties them together. In this case, it's circles. So it's not really important that it's circles. I mean, it doesn't matter that there's circles in each picture, but it sort of alludes to the idea that these pictures are related to each other in some way. And then it leads the viewer to kind of discern why that might be. And then there's a piece of text here that is actually an excerpt that I wrote, and it's about the previous image. So we decided not to put it with that image so that you can see that image and have your own interpretation of it. And then as you flip the page, you'll get kind of my interpretation of it. So I'll read you that excerpt now. LA is the land of constructs. While many real struggles exist within this complex city, just as many are fabricated by a society obsessed with perfection. The image of the sculpted round tree in a modest front yard speaks to the futility of this pursuit for most. The white picket fence, the universal symbol of middle-class assimilation, paint chipping off its surface. Shoots of new growth rebelliously defy the tended perfection of the manicured tree. Control and chaos in a constant struggle, all reflecting our own self-worth and social standing for all the world to see. Now, these two images are still kind of playing on that control and chaos theme, and that's going to be something that unfolds for several pages. It's also playing on the human-non-human relationship within designed spaces. The image on the left is actually a Stoss employee monitoring growth of the trees at Venice High School, which is the site where Stoss did design work. The barbed wire and the cactus illustrate an interesting relationship between human designed spaces and the natural world, and how they're both utilizing similar strategies to a similar end. As we move on, we get to a technical drawing by Stoss, and we're seeing the circles again, so that's a continuation of that motif, but in this case, it's a very direct relationship because those are planters, and the site that we're seeing here is Venice High School, which is where the previous image in the circles as the planters were seen. So we're actually seeing the same thing represented in the drawing. Moving on, we get to this spread, and this idea of control and chaos is still playing out. The text that we came across in the image of the tree all those pages back is still kind of relevant to what we're seeing here. The image on the left is kind of, I think of as like a psychoanalyzing of the human landscape. I could almost imagine like a Far Side cartoon caption underneath it, something to do with the human condition. But the image on the right is kind of another view of the same space, and it kind of speaks to these tensions that exist at the edges of these human designed spaces where wildness starts to creep back in. And then finally, in this last spread, we're looking at this sort of the same duality, except in reverse. So we're starting on the left with this just very natural expression of this beautiful tree, talking about just the natural beauty of the wildness that exists in LA and the beautiful plant life. And then on the right, we're seeing what at first appears to be a kind of wild space with this bird as the central figure. But here we're seeing the infrastructure kind of creeping in the background. And so that's just kind of a bit about my interpretation on that particular set of images. What's interesting about this body of work, I think, and the collaboration involved, is that if I was to ask Chris to go through those same images and give his perspective, it would probably be a totally different analysis. And if I asked anyone else who's seen the book, they would have their own take on it. And I think that's the cool thing about it. This isn't the correct interpretation. It's just what I was thinking when we were working on sequencing those images together. So now I'm going to pass it back to Chris. Thank you. Do you want me to have the mic in case? Are you going to pass it to me?
Yeah, why don't you take that? So on that image on the beach with the fisherman and the bird, he still never told me the answer to the question, which I kind of love. One of the things about the book intentionally is that it has many through lines. Each person that opens it can find their own set of thematics or interests and then kind of trace that through the 7 different cities. Mike just talked about wildlife, tensions between the natural and artificial, how those are manifest in one place versus another can reveal a lot about those different kinds of places and also the kinds of similarities that exist between people. Because you're a design audience, I'm going to give you 3 through lines in the book as well that are a little bit more design oriented. But again, Mike could give you a whole different perspective on the images I'm about to show you. The first of those deals with sociability and human behavior, which has always been an interest of mine and an interest of the firm's. Here we're interested in the very unself-conscious ways in which we encounter the world and then perhaps reappropriate it for our own desires. Kids are especially good at this, kids of all ages. This one, by the way, this photograph, which is up in the gallery, we nicknamed Sternum Boys because of the very prominent sternums. It's about everyday life with joys, with tensions, and how these play out in the public realm, whether those are intentionally designed public realms, like this at the University of Michigan, or in other casual urban spaces, or even rural spaces. These are images and characteristics of people just doing the things they do, right? Sometimes in very unexpected places. We, as people, adapt to the conditions around us and then put them to unintended use to suit our purposes. This is what's happening in Herman Hertzberger's photo of two ladies on the right here, lunching in front of a cafe and sandwiched between two parked cars, sort of comfortably, I guess. It's also what the folks in the left image are doing in spite of the intentional neglect and lack of investment they have faced. People like them find their own place in the world. We appropriate the stuff around us, adapt it in our own bodies to the tasks or desires at hand. In some ways, this has roots in the work of William White, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces from 1980. The work significant in understanding how what we design, whether it's a bench, a public space, or an entire district of the city, might pick up on the innate behavioral characteristics and habits of people as starting points for thinking about how we shape people's environments. Choice, diversity, flexibility, and adaptability of designed elements and spaces and of the people who will come to inhabit them are critical informants for a place to be conducive to richly changing social and collective uses. These images from the Harvard Science Center Plaza. At the City Deck in Green Bay, our imaginations and constructions connect very closely to the everyday and to the mundane, sometimes to the collective, oftentimes to the celebratory, even as we have our own very personal and intimate moments within these spaces. Our work is just a prompt encouraging people to act out their lives while also leaving room for the unanticipated, the unexpected, things we can't imagine but others can, and those things that are simply beyond our control. We couldn't have imagined that moment between a mother and a daughter. Mike found it. Second, the intermingling of urbanization and environmental processes. This is Alex McLean's photograph of an island in the middle of New Bedford Harbor, town I grew up in Massachusetts. We used to go there as a little adventure to get away from the city. The situation is a tidal river. It's an estuary. It's the center of a very active harbor. And yet it's also a scrappy abandoned landscape along a monolithic piece of infrastructure, that big hurricane barrier that you see. It's a place where we felt like we're both at the center of it all, but also worlds apart from what was happening around us. Years later, I learned that the same hurricane dike that I used to walk to get to this island contributed to the slow poisoning of the harbor and the river mouth. It's this confluence of processes, the complexities involved that are very much of interest. The confluence of work, recreation, ecology, infrastructure, and environmental crisis at the heart of the city, as well as the challenges of industrialization and infrastructural ambitions, make it a place caught up in some of the same struggles cities like Galveston face today. Here in Galveston, where the tensions between environmental impact, people trying to get by, struggles for existence, and also wonderful unexpected moments of surprise and joy, like at the fish market on the right. Here there are economic and social and urban and biological dissonances, sometimes a sense of impending doom, a confluence of risk and cost, all amidst people tending to day-to-day matters and carefree vacationers burying their father in the sand. Here you find the rich, varied, complex, even troublesome starting points, ways we might help imagine new futures around the need to adapt. In LA, a different context entirely, socially, politically, environmentally, heat, fire, drought, loss of biodiversity, a city of infrastructure, a city of consumption. Here, the impact and implication of landscape, powerful and persistent in the heart of cities and as a shaper of city life, at a wide range of scales from the individual person to the larger ecosystem, is where I see landscape and the lives of cities converging. City life, urban infrastructure, social networks, and ecological dynamics are together the starting point for our work and for what we try to instigate, initiate, or interact with as we design and program public space projects. They also represent the larger scene within which our work and life itself in the contemporary American city is set. Mike also reminds us, though, that LA offers something else entirely, the detailed and the discrete, an accumulation of beautiful, textured, even tender moments. Opportunities for quiet and personal connection amidst the swirl and energy and scale of things beyond. And third, questions of identity, race, and social justice. Who do we make cities for, and who's been excluded? Here's the struggle for the full rights of all people as equal citizens with just and equitable access to life and all that it offers. Here there are issues that are not that far out of view, but may require a strategic turn of perspective or a somewhat deeper dive into parallel worlds, parallel cities that have been constructed specifically for whites on the left and for blacks on the right. And yet through all of this, you see the spirit and persistence of people sharing time, sharing food and laughter, sharing each other. This raises questions. Whose spaces are these? For whom were they made? Who was erased? Who is not welcome here? One of our collaborators, Dee Nichols, asks in her essay, how do we cross lines? How do we disrupt the physical, political, social, economic, and racial lines that have been drawn for us? Who do we design for? In Detroit, a city of hope, a city of resurgence, starting to find common ground. New and emerging landscapes and public realm projects built around social common denominators, as Dee would say, food, music, social interaction, opportunities for joy. This builds on the work that people are doing themselves to transform the city and the landscapes around them, tapping sometimes into art and culture and to cultivating the land. Here, folks are imagining new futures grounded on new social conditions, new rights to the city, new ways to collectively occupy space and animate urban landscapes, and the work they're doing to rebuild relationships between and among each other. Still, with work to do. More broadly, the stages on which we work, the actors we engage with, are already in motion when we arrive. Our work as designers begins many acts in, and our appearances are sometimes relatively short. You might think of our work as understanding the scripts and dialogues as they are playing themselves out, interacting with those on stage and the forces behind the scenes in ways that both respond to and shift what is at work. Resetting the trajectory of the play in ways that sometimes reveals what is hidden just beneath the surface, and giving voice to those who have been off stage. In so many ways, the project tries to communicate the hopes and dreams, the struggles and challenges of contemporary life in American cities and urban landscapes to all who will look and listen closely. With that, we look forward to conversation. We look forward to having you join us in the gallery afterwards. Thank you.